What is up, everybody? This is episode 2 of the Catch My Six podcast. Welcome. I'm excited to have you here. Today we have the co-host starting on with me. I'm super excited to introduce the one and only Tim. Yes, that is it. His name is Tim. He's an ordinary guy. That's where his qualifications lie, just like me. And he has a passion for self-improvement and personal growth. And today he's on the podcast just talking about his journey through that, kind of what he's experienced in life and the processes he's taken to overcome those types of situations. So without further ado, let's get into it.
Hey Casey, thanks for that intro. Happy to be here. Can't wait to continue to pressing forward with our always progress, don't ever regress. Big fan of yours. We've been friends for a while now. Uh, really excited to be here again, co-hosting this podcast with you. This means a lot to me. I'm all about lessening that stigma in mental health. We just lost a friend of ours last week. It's real difficult. It's a trying time for everybody. It's just really wearing down on the soul that we keep losing people to mental health problems and suicide. It's not easy. So being here, hopefully doing this podcast can, even if it only helps one person, that's probably good enough for me. So I'm just here to tell my story like you did last week, let people know that even ordinary people, just your average Joes, still have struggles. And we're not trying to say that our struggles are worse than anybody else's struggles or that we've been through the worst life can dish. We're just two guys that have just been through what may seem like less than ordinary or like not even anything too hard to get through. Like just everybody experiences mental health, mental anguish in different ways, regardless of how difficult that trauma may seem on the outside, the way we may the way we may see that on the inside is different than the way it came across on the outside. So we're just trying to help people understand that nobody's perfect. Nobody's going through this life without any kind of mental anguish or mental struggle. It could be the hardest in the world. It could just be a little bit. Like struggling is struggling, regardless of how hard it may look on the outside. So that's the whole point of this podcast. We're just trying to get it out there and let other people know that it's not just you. You aren't the only one out there. And hopefully, with us sharing our stories and starting this podcast off, we can just help other people out there and just bring a little bit more light to this world.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the coolest things you just mentioned was the fact that it doesn't matter if it's how severe the situation is. Everyone handles stress differently. So I mean, we've all had that friend that responds to something small like a flat tire and just losing their complete mind over this tire like it's the end of the world. And some people would look at that and think like, dude, it's just a flat tire. Like call the tow truck, have them, whatever. But you don't know what that experience to them feels like, whether it be on past experiences they had. Maybe the last tire, that went flat was, on the side of the road with their dad and they got, the crap beat out of you. You don't know what their situation is, or maybe they're financially strained and they know like, hey, if I call a tow truck, I'm not gonna be able to put food on the table. Like there's a million things that could be going through that person's mind. And so, I mean, anybody has seen like, somebody respond extremely to such a small situation, and then others where people come in like their wife just left or something devastating, someone just passed away, and like they seem like a normal day, so you don't know how people are going to respond to these situations. So like you said, it doesn't matter whether it's a massive life-changing traumatic experience or something small like a stubbed toe, which is no small thing. It doesn't really matter. We all experience stress differently, we all experience life differently, and it's cool to have a couple ordinary guys just BSing about our journeys and trying to experiment with ideas out there with processing concepts so that other people who listen to the podcast can try those same things and see what works for them. Like you said, I don't think we need a lot of the big name people. A lot of podcasts do that where they bring on these huge names, and that's great, especially if you're a leader in your field and you can give specific kind of advice on whatever field that is. That's fantastic, but people often lose the reality that everybody goes through it. It's not when you look at somebody who's been through and they come in with these massive ideas like this is what you need to do to change, you often look at them and say, man, like I'll never be that guy. You know what I mean? Like I'll never be to where that guy is in life. I'll never be there, you know. And we don't want to, you know, project that or show that to anybody because it's a day-to-day process. You know, every single day you're making that choice to either grow or to be content with where you are. And contentment leads to complacency, and I highly, you know, recommend you don't stay there. So anyways, I'm glad to have you on. I'm glad that you're taking this journey with me to help people just continually grow. And I'm excited to hear, you know, about your journey personally, because I'm not sure if I've even heard this story yet.
Yeah, I mean, not a lot of people really. It's just one of those things where getting into the military, like we both are. Like, I mean, I joined when I was 22, so some of those struggles were just stuff I struggled with, and some of my close friends struggled with. But it was never anything I had to display or talk about while I've been in. And then some of that was in the military, and some of the story you may know, some of it you won't know. But I guess starting off, it was pretty much high school. I had a pretty normal childhood. There wasn't really anything struggling there. My family kind of moved every 4 years, but it wasn't anything mentally struggling for me. But for some people, that may have been an issue. But I mean, I love the fact that we moved as often as we did because I got to see new places, make new friends. But in high school was whenever we kind of slowed down. My parents stayed in the same spot. I was in the same middle school, high school for all 6 years, and high school with all those teenage hormones and all that. And I know people probably don't want to hear about how difficult high school was because everybody had a different high school experience. I didn't have too bad of a high school experience. I was one of those chameleons where I had a friend group in every clique in the school, so I'd never really kind of struggled with talking to people during lunch or talking to people in classes. But that also is there's also a problem with that when you're like a a friendship chameleon and you can just go and hang out with anybody. That means you have a whole lot of like okay friends and not a lot of close friends. So it's just like a lot of surface level friendships,
Right.
right? So like that's not the best way to go through high school. I have one friendship from high school of somebody I still talk with on a fairly regular basis. Out of everyone in high school I was friends with, I have one person from high school I still talk to. So high school was just kind of was not necessarily lonely, but it definitely wasn't as fulfilling as it could have been. Um, High school was also where I first started to cut myself. I don't cut myself anymore, so don't freak out. But I started cutting in high school when I was a sophomore, and not really out of any kind of like I need to feel something kind of feelings. I was just I was bored. I just felt like cutting myself at that point was what was expected of me because that I was that kid that only wore black and red because I thought it was cool. And so I picked up the whole like I'm hardcore because this was 2004. So it was the hardcore era. So I yeah, it's what I thought was expected of somebody with my kind of style, my kind of attitude is I just also had to cut myself. So I never really felt the need to, except for the fact that I was like, you know what, I should probably just do it because it's the image I want to
Well,
portray.
it's
So
it's almost like, you know, 'cause you said you're like you're a friendship, like a group chameleon, right? So it almost seems like you didn't know who you were at all because you were just kind of
yeah,
conforming to whatever group you were in. You know what I mean?
yeah, it was kind of like an ideology. I didn't really have any kind of like self-image. I wanted to portray a self-image of like a loner, isolated kind of cool dude, but it was just a 5'8" Tim with glasses and thick hair on a swim team. So it's not like I wasn't athletic. It wasn't like I didn't have a group of people I hung out with on a regular basis twice a day on the swim team. But it was just this really weird mental gymnastics I was doing where I was like, well, that's what people do when they want attention. That's what people do when they're bored. Like I had this really twisted kind of idea that I probably need to cut myself to go to the next step, and that lasted all of like 6 months, and it wasn't even good. It was like it was a really dull camping knife that
Oh my
it
God.
wouldn't even cut with like one stroke. I was sitting there just like carving away on my arms or legs or something. It was really really kind of childish. But again, I was in high school, and I'm not trying to I'm not condoning cutting. I'm not telling that people who have cut before you're stupid. I'm my personal experience. It was a very immature thing that I thought was expected of me as a sophomore in high school. And so that's kind of where my like mental struggle started because I didn't really have a self identity in high school. I was on the swim team. I was the best swimmer at my high school, which isn't saying much. Uh, and I had a close group of service level friends and not really any deep connections in high school. And so the majority of high school was pretty much like that. I had that one friend though who is still my best friend to this day.
How did he become or she become your best friend?
Cause he saw what I was doing and was like, "Hey, dude, I don't get why you're doing this." And I was like, "Hey, you know what? I'm just that kind of person." And he was like, "All right." And he didn't really stop me from doing it. He was just he was that person to be there if I needed to talk to anybody. So he did a really he pulled it off really well. And then we just hit it off because we like the same video games, we like the same sports, we like doing the same thing. He was also on the swim team, so it worked out great. Um, his name's Hunter, but I think we may you may have met him
I
before.
think so.
But yeah, so that was pretty much high school. But by the time I was a junior senior, I had a much different mental outlook. I was a happier person. I was in a long term relationship that was kind of off and on like high school relationships are. And then I went to college. I made the choice to leave Texas to go out of state to an out of state university in New York. So a 22-hour drive away or a $400 plane ticket. So I went out of state for the first time in my entire life. I wasn't with my parents for at least a weekend. And that wasn't bad. I had fun my freshman year of college. I had too much fun. I didn't. I mean, I had a 1.4 GPA by the time I left
Wow.
college. By the time I left my freshman year of college, I didn't have any necessarily mental struggles while I was there. I enjoyed it. I got to that school on a swim scholarship, so I lost that after the end of my freshman year because of my grades, but I didn't have to pay for that year of college.
Well, that's good.
But that I didn't have too much struggles with that. It was coming back from Hartwick, coming back from my freshman year of college, that I met my soon-to-be ex-wife. Um, so that was 19. I came back from freshman year at 19, joined up with a community college in my local area, which is a smart way to do. It's much smarter to do community college than it is to go to actual universities. And I met my soon-to-be ex-wife, and me and her were together for 4 years, married
Just
for
to clarify, you
6 months.
say soon to be, but that's already a past tense thing, right? Like, okay,
Yeah. Yeah. It's like at 19, she was my girlfriend, and then she then becomes a wife, and then she becomes an
okay.
ex-wife.
Just wanted to
So
make sure.
all before the age of 23.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. So me and this woman were dating off and on. Not a great relationship. Really, just kind of like a rebound, kind of like we were there for each other kind of relationship because neither one of us were happy at the time. I was upset that I wasn't going back to my university in New York, and then I was upset that there wasn't a swim team down here to be on. So I wasn't necessarily depressed, but I definitely was more down than I should have been. And then she was just kind of crazy. I shouldn't use the word crazy. She was just concerned about her own livelihood over anything else. So we dated for 4 years. I asked her to marry me after basic training, like most mistakes get made. And I get to Dias, right? So I get to my first duty station where I meet you. You were deployed at the time, and within 2 months of being at my first duty station in Abilene, I find out she's been cheating on me with with a friend of mine who is no longer a friend of mine. But I found out she's been cheating on me with a friend of mine who was in another state, and that's where she was currently living while I was moving to Abilene to be at my first duty station. So I found all that out within like a month, and
Wow.
it was rough because like not only are you angry, but then you're like in my particular position, I had hair at the beginning of our relationship, and then I didn't have as much hair at the end of that
Oh,
relationship. So in my mind, I was like, well, there goes the prime years I have of having hairstyles, and now I'm at a point where I'm shaving my head because I have a bald spot. So I was really upset about that because I didn't feel I had a really low self-image of myself because I was balding and trying to accept it but not wanting to accept it. So I had a really low self-image that nobody was going to want to date me, nobody was going to get married to me again. I was also going to swear off women because I was done with it. I was like, I'm not going to deal with this because like she was lying for like 6 months about what was going on, and he was lying about what was going on. So it was like 6 months of them pretending it didn't happen when I had evidence from Facebook messages and text messages to friends of mine that didn't know that we had gotten married. So they had thought me and her had broken up and she was dating somebody else, and that's what they thought
What?
until they found out that I was like, no, we got married. Like she, like she's supposed to be living with me in Abilene.
Wow.
And they're like, Tim, we need to tell you something. I was like, what's going on? They're like, look at these messages. And I was like, oh my God. So yeah, I found all that out within a I found that out within a month period that had been happening for 6 months. So my first year at my first duty station was rough. I don't know if you remember back in 2012, Casey, what I was like on the flight line, but I was not a good person. I was not a I was a bad airman.
What?
Uh,
No, I don't remember you specifically and how you were at that time. I do know that that was the time that I was actually going through my change as well. So
I remember I was invited to that party with the underage drinking. And I specifically said, I'm not going anywhere to hang out with any of these people because I don't like anybody here. Because I was going through my own struggle with the fact that I hated the fact that I was in the military. I hated the fact that when it happened to me, it happened to me. I hated, I, I was just a really angry person for like a
hey, hold
whole
on one
year. I was
second.
just,
So
it was just, yeah, it was just rough. I didn't like being there at all. So that was a good year of just me not being happy. Eventually, though, I started pushing through it. I realized I couldn't be that kind of person. I was getting feedback from I was getting feedback from people above me and my peers as well that like they're like, hey man, like you need to fix yourself because this is not okay. And I mean, being told to fix yourself isn't the easiest thing to be told, and it's not the greatest verbiage to be told. But I did start working on myself. I did start going to the gym more often. I did started like self-reflecting on the fact that what happened wasn't necessarily my fault. It's not like I drove those two individuals to be the way they were,
right.
right? Like I couldn't blame myself for the actions of others. So one of the first things I did, like I kind of came to the realization that I would never forgive them for what happened, but I could always forgive myself for
Yeah.
letting it affect me. You know, like does that make sense? It's one of those things where it's like you don't have to forgive and forget the other people. You can forgive and forget for yourself. So like I forgave myself for making the mistake of putting my trust in somebody who in the past had shown they didn't deserve my trust to begin with. So I mean like I'm a big fan of like trust and respect until until people like show you they don't deserve your trust and respect. So it's not like I'm not going to ever trust anybody on the first try. But she had already shown in the past over our 4-year relationship that we shouldn't have been married. We shouldn't have stayed together. There was plenty of time. Like we had broken up 3 or 4 times in our dating period, so it wasn't she. It was one of those things where I had made the mistake of continuing to trust somebody that had already shown before that they didn't deserve my trust. In the same way with him, he was already kind of like I'd already seen how he acted to other people and how he had treated other people around me, and I would just assume that I was one of those people that
Okay.
oh he'll never do that to me. I'm his friend kind of thing. So again, it was one of those situations where like I had to forgive myself for putting my trust into two people that were untrustworthy. And so that was the first step I took when it came to getting over that whole thing with my ex-wife and my ex-best friend was I had to figure out how to move on from my own anguish and loss of loss of self-respect from that I just forgave myself and started moving on and trying to do things to better myself to get my self image higher than it was because it was pretty low at the time. I felt really bad about it because I was balding. I'd gained some weight since basic. I was eating poorly because I was just living in an apartment building, eating out all the time. I wasn't making my own food. So I started cooking my own food. I started going to the gym more often. I got on a different shift so that way I could facilitate easier uh, stuff like going to the gym and buying food and everything. So those are the first steps I was taking after that first year. So by 2013, uh, I was doing much better. I was feeling better about myself. I was more confident. I was learning the job. I was becoming I was becoming a much better person. And then I deployed that following year in 2013, and that was when I became the most fit I've ever been in my life. Even when I was in the swim team, I was doing really good with the gym. I was going twice a day towards the end of that 6 month deployment. Um, I I hadn't heard from my ex-wife in over 6 months at that point. She tried texting me right before that deployment, and I just didn't text back. But I didn't hear from her all 6 months, and I haven't heard from her since. Uh, which I mean, it's like 10 years removed now, but uh, and it was much easier after that deployment. I got my appendicitis on the deployment, which kind of lowered my I couldn't go to the gym for 6 months because or I couldn't lift weights for 60 days. And after 60 days of not going to the gym and not being able to do anything, it's remotivating yourself to get back into a gym routine is like the hardest thing ever. So I had 60 days of bed rest basically, where I couldn't lift weights, and then I just didn't get back into the gym. But I still had good mental fortitude from that deployment that I did really well those next couple years. And it was after that deployment that I met my current wife and soulmate and best friend. And me and her have been together since 2014. We dated in 2014. We got married in 2014, and we had Finn in 2015. And Finn is my son, all you audio listeners. And so 2014, came back from the deployment, took leave, met my now wife, and haven't been couldn't have been happier. Me and her were doing great. We are doing great. But in 2015, we had Finn, and I deployed a month after we had Finn. So my wife was left alone for 4 months with a 2 month old, and then by the time I got back from deployment, he was 6 months old. And then uh, we went through some marital issues. We went through some struggles. A lot of that resulting from uh, my wife's postpartum depression that went undiagnosed because all 4 months of my deployment, she was getting she could only sleep at 2 hours at a time with between breastfeeding and diapers and all that other kind of stuff. Finn was not a very easy child to raise that young, so she didn't have any breaks for the entire 4 months because she didn't have that many close friends at the time. And my family, she would have to drive out to my family to get breaks and stuff like that, so she didn't get a lot of sleep, which led to worsening her postpartum depression, which led to worsening her relationship with alcohol. So by the time we had identified that she was still in postpartum nearly 8 months after my deployment, we went through a real marriage struggle between her alcoholism, postpartum depression, and some choices she had made. We're doing much better now. We went through a year and a half of counseling, which was probably like the first 6 months was probably the toughest 6 months I've ever had to do in my life compared to my first marriage, anything I had to do in high school, any deployment I've been on. Like those first 6 months of marriage counseling with my wife were probably the hardest struggle I've ever had. And I'm not a very emotional guy. I don't think anybody that's listening has ever seen me cry. My wife is the only person that's seen me cry, and probably my mom. Nobody else has seen me show any kind of emotions. I'm a very stoic person. It makes me look like I'm apathetic. It's just I'm not one of those people that can just like show emotion in public. I just can't physically do it. My brain just won't let me. So, but for those first 6 months, it was like a daily thing, where like myself or my wife would be like crying, either holding and each each other, or we'd be in counseling crying. It was a rough 6 months. It was probably the closest I've been to wanting to do something that would negatively
Yeah, I
affect
do.
everybody in
I
my
know
life
exactly
for
what
the
you're
rest of
saying.
their lives, kind of thing, if you know what I'm saying. Um, so it was rough, and but we got through it, right? Cooler heads prevailed. A year and a half of marriage counseling was probably the best choice I ever could have done. And it wasn't even the most upsetting part about it was nobody at my work recommended the marriage counseling, right? Like nobody at work knew what happened. Nobody at work outside of two individuals knew what happened, and neither one of them recommended marriage counseling. No, neither one of them recommended anything besides going to talk to mental health. And that was the only help I got was like, hey, you should go talk to mental health. And then they went about and did their own thing again. And it was mental health at Dias that actually recommended me to a marriage counselor out there who was like the best person I've ever spoken to. Like this, he was great. Me and my wife both loved him. We missed the fact that we PCS'd away from Abilene just because he was such a great guy. Um, and so, I mean, and that's kind of the reason that me and you want to do this podcast, right? Me and my wife went through something really traumatic, and the only help I got at my work was two individuals, and they didn't even do anything to help facilitate the issues that arose and why they arose. They were just like, they just told me, hey, go see mental health. We'll see you tomorrow. And I was like, great. Um, all they did was take my guns away, as if that was gonna, like, if I had an intent to do anything,
And
taking
that's
my
like
guns away was
that's
gonna
kind of
stop
like
me.
a
Like, there's not other
that's
ways
such
to
a
do anything.
terrible thing to do
Uh,
anyways, because that's just like, first of all, they don't know how to process the information of what you're going through, so their first response is like, hey, let's just toss him to somebody else and say that we did something, and then to go in and take your guns,
yeah,
like,
yeah,
labels you as, oh, he's, now he's got the stigma of suicidal. It's like, wait a minute, I just needed some help. You know what I mean? Like, I'm just going through something. I'm looking for somebody to help me. And
yeah,
instead of helping you, they just like, you know, throw you to somebody else and then slap you with this like this like suicidal, branding, which, is, not a bad thing. There's obviously suicide is a bad thing, but like if you're experiencing that, obviously take the measures you need to get out of that mindset. But when you're going through something and you need help, to get hit with that on, right from the get-go, it really discourages you, right?
yeah. It's
Yeah,
really
there you go.
it comes off kind of heartless. I can understand the reasoning. Is because they're like, well, do you have any weapons in your house? I was like, yeah, I got a shotgun and a pistol. They're like, all right, well, can you give those to anybody? And it's like, all right, come on, dude. We're in the middle of a conversation right now, and these are the questions you're gonna ask me. It's not like I can understand if they want to bring it up at a later point in the conversation, but like damn near 5 minutes in, and you're just like, I'm like, all right, I understand that I'm crying right now and I'm distraught about what's happening, but that reaction is not the reaction somebody in a traumatic event wants to hear. Because then it's just like, yeah, you're right. You know what? I do have guns at home, and I'm not going to come bring those to you right now because I'm just
Yeah.
going to go home and use them. Like, that's how it comes off. And it's really just like one of those things where it's like, well, I don't really want to talk to you anymore. So thank you for recommending mental health. I'll go talk to them. And then there was never a follow up. One of them did a follow up, and it was really just like, "Hey, how's everything going?" And it was like, "It's going all right at this point." And I'm like, all right, well, sounds good. And then they're like, "My door's open if you need
That
anything."
blanket
And
statement,
like they
my
didn't
door's
push the
open.
issue, and it's one of those things where it's like, yeah, the blanket statement. And there's like, in situations like that, you can't listen to what somebody says. Like, even though they say, "Hey, everything's all right," you don't do that. Like, you pull them into your office, you pull them aside, you force the conversation. You have to force it, because nobody's going to say, "I need help," in a group, in a crowd, or in the hallway, unless they're at a point where they're at the point at where it's almost no return, right? Like, no one's gonna ask you for help in a hallway. They're gonna, but if you pull it, if I'd
Yeah.
been pulled into an office, it would have been a much different conversation. So it's just one of those things. It's like, I don't know. It was just rough. Um, doing much better now. Doing great. In fact, I would say me and my wife are better now than we were
The
prior
counseling,
to
right?
uh what had happened. Yeah, because like me and her both had an unhealthy relationship with alcohol. Her more so, obviously. Um, I did too. I still drink. I don't drink nearly to the same way I did before. Um, I can count on my hand how many times I've been blackout drunk since our marriage counseling sessions, and it's been twice. Uh, so I don't drink nearly as much as I used to. I don't. have that negative relationship with alcohol. I have much better respect with alcohol, and hopefully eventually we're working on it. I probably just won't be drinking ever again. I'll find some other kind of vice, whether that's working out, whether that's running, whether that's mountain biking, whether that's chewing gum. Like I'll find something. I'm working on finding other things to help
Yeah,
uh,
the thing
scratch
that
that
helps
itch,
you
if
manage
as
or
you could
deal
say.
with that stress, and that's such a key thing because whatever you put in
Yeah,
that place,
exactly.
it has to be filled, right? You can't just say, well, I drinking for me is a problem, and that's first off the first step is identifying that, right? So not it might not even be drinking, it might be whatever it is, and in your mind is like, oh, it's really not that big of a deal. Well, you need to identify that, like, hey, it might not be a big deal to most people, but to me, I use it to manage stress. Therefore, it can be a very bad thing if if I'm not careful, right? And so, first off, identifying that, and two, if you just take that out and you don't put anything in there to manage the stress, then all you're doing is giving yourself no way to manage the stress, which is just going to be pretty much bottling it up until you say, hey, you know what? Drinking or whatever has helped me in the past. That's your go-to response, and at that point it's so bottled up, it's so needed essentially, that you're just gonna all out, and it's gonna be a destructive path.
No, exactly. Yeah. So, in my experience, saying, "Oh, well, I don't have a problem with that, or I have a control on it," is a lie. Like, if I'm ever like, "Oh, no, 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 I'm like, no, no, I only smoke a little bit of pot." Like, if that's the conversation, like, no, no, no. If you have to justify how little or how much you do
Yeah.
something, that means you already have an issue with it, right? Like, if you have to try to justify it that, oh, no, 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 I only drink like this on 3-day weekends, or I only drink like this on reasons to celebrate, but then every weekend you find a reason to celebrate. Like, that's like when you're justifying your problems is when you know they're a big problem. And so I'm not trying to justify my drinking. I don't want to drink as much, and I want to continue to drink less, and I want to get to a point where I don't drink anymore. um, I'm working on it, and I will get there at one point, and it'll probably be when I'm out of the military and I'm have other legal availabilities to me that in the state I potentially will live in. So at that point, I probably won't be drinking anymore. But as of right now, I still have the occasional beer. I usually have like 3 or 4 beers on Fridays and Saturdays, and then maybe one or two throughout the week. But it's nothing crazy, and I don't let it get crazy. I do my best to keep myself in a nice uh
Yeah,
I don't know how to phrase it. I just do myself to keep do everything I can to keep
to
myself
maintain that positive headspace.
to a good level. Eh, Yeah, positive headspace, exactly. So yeah, so the last major struggle I went through was with me and my wife in our marriage. And even that deployment before what had happened with
Right.
our marriage, when we had lost that aircraft, when that plane had crashed, uh and me and two others were the last person to work on it and launch it out, and that plane then crashed and 11 people died. That wasn't as traumatic to me as me and my wife's marriage counseling sessions. So that speaks volumes in my mind. um, I would never want to go through the same, like, I would never want to go through, and I would never want anybody else to go through the things me and my wife had to go through. I would rather go through another aircraft incident investigation than go through the same marriage
But you are
struggles me and my
saying
wife have
that,
been through
like, the
once already.
counseling itself was extremely positive. Like, no matter how tough it was, like, you would definitely recommend that
Oh,
to.
yes. Yes. Oh, 100%. Find the counselor that works for you. We got lucky with our first counselor. Was great. My wife had already tried seeing a counselor for herself for her postpartum prior to our incident. She had tried, and she didn't like that counselor, and so she didn't go back because she didn't like the counselor because he was. I mean, I don't really, I can't speak for her. I just remember that she just mentioned he was kind of cold, and I was like, all right, well, we'll find you somebody else. I we never really found anybody else until what happened, and then we found our first try was with our counselor Tracy, and he was fantastic, and it was probably like he pretty much saved our marriage, like 100%. Like everything he did, way he explained everything, the exercises he made us go through, 100% would recommend a marriage counselor to anybody that feels like if your marriage is worth having at the beginning, it's worth keeping, and it's worth working on. You just got to find that counselor. You just got to find that person that you and your wife or you and your spouse, whoever it may be, uh, clicks. Like as long as if you click with that counselor and what they say makes sense to both of you and you both agree, like it was the best thing ever. Like we went and saw him. We were like the month before we PCS'd from Abilene. We went and sat down with him for an hour to just like chat about what he did to help us out. We brought him some baked goods and we just like let him know like, hey, like you're amazing and everything you did helped us out. And like he even told us that we were one of his success stories and that not everybody who comes and sees him was as good as we were, and that meant a lot to us because he was like, y'all showed the initiative on day one, and he's like, and I don't see that. And so he was just a really
I
good
think that
marriage
comes back
counselor,
to like you got to
and
want
he
it.
was a
You know
really
what I
good
mean? Like
guy.
if you'd have both gone in there and you said
Yeah,
earlier, you know, like you both agreed with what was being said, and I don't know if that's necessarily a prerequisite for, you know, successful marriage counseling. I've never been through marriage counseling, although the wife and I are seeking it. But you know, I don't know if agreeing on everything is a prerequisite. I think having an open mind to things and being willing to do the work is the prerequisite. You know what I mean? And you can correct me if I'm wrong. If I'm completely wrong,
it's not necessarily agreeing. Yeah, no, it's having like when I meant agreeing,
yeah,
it's like having the open mind, like wanting to fix what was wrong. Like just going to marriage counseling to just like go through the motions because you're like, well, this is what's expected is we're supposed to go to marriage counseling, but don't expect me to do anything. That's not that's not what I'm talking about. Like we both went in with the open mind of we are going to try to fix this and we are going to put our best effort into it. 100%. We are going to do what we can, and if this doesn't work, then we'll get divorced and we'll split custody kind of thing. Like that was the mindset going in. I mean, granted, we were both in our late 20s, so we weren't some 19-year-olds trying to go through marriage counseling. Like we were like we were adults at that point, like more than adults, more than most adults, more than most marriages in the military. We were already past that average age. So
yeah. Like
there was already a different kind of
is there a
mindset
marriage
involved.
after this? Is there really time to fix what we have? Can this person actually change? Those kinds of thoughts.
Yes, exactly. It's like one of those things where it's like, is this worth the effort of putting into because we're at this stage in our lives?
Yeah,
Is this like
absolutely.
do this, that, and the other thing? Like there was a list of things. And we both went in open mind, 100%, and it was rough for 6 months. And then after that, everything started working out. Everything started coming back together. We started being our normal selves again. We started just like our love got deeper. Like our love
But
got
it's
deeper, and it sounds
true.
super lame. And I'm sure anybody listening, yeah, and I'm sure anybody listening is like, oh my God, their love got deeper. But I mean, again, the whole purpose of this podcast is to just put ourselves out there so
Right.
that other people can see that they're not the only ones, right? But ever since that, like, I wouldn't say there's been much more struggles in my life. I mean, everybody has days that they're down, everybody has days that they're up. But I mean, there may be days that I have one step back, and then there's days where I have like 4 or 5 steps forward. Always making positive progress, though. Always making positive progress, long term positive progress. Just because I go 3 or 4 or 5 days being stagnant doesn't mean I'm going to stay stagnant. Just everybody needs rest days. Everybody needs days to get back to baseline. So, but ever since marriage counseling, so like the last 3 years have been pretty good. Um, Not every day's great. Not every day is going to be the worst though. So it's been pretty good. I can't say my
Yeah, I
life's
think like
been
you said, it's
amazing, but I
definitely a
mean it's been pretty good.
process. You know,
Uh,
like it's a day to day choice. And I had that thought, and I had that thought this morning that you know, a lot of times when people start this self help journey, it's for something or for someone, not necessarily for themselves. You know what I mean? And if you hold on to that, if you continually
yeah,
do it for a different reason other than to just do it for yourself, then two things might happen. One, you'll get discouraged because you're only looking on the potential failure, like what's going to happen if I fail. And you're not going to do it for the right reasons, right? You're going to be continually fearful of what might happen if you don't change or you don't succeed. And out of fear, there's no love. You know what I mean? Or two, if you have that failure in
Exactly.
sight and you're like, for instance, if I don't change, I'm going to, lose my marriage. Once you get to a point where your marriage is happy, then you stop growing. You know what I mean? And that in itself is also a failure. So you have to keep this, idea that this is for you and only you, and it's a day-to-day process. And like you said, like sometimes you need a break. Sometimes you need to, take a seat and just relax and watch a random show that has nothing to do with self growth, and that's totally fine. But as long as you don't stay there, you know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
you don't want to, yeah,
No, yeah. You always gotta be walking. I told you the other day, when we were talking about doing this podcast and how I wanted to join you. I told you that I'm a firm believer in
yeah,
it's not the first step, it's the next step. It's from a book I read, and I don't want to put my style of books out there that I like to read, and just like people don't like sharing what kind of music taste they have because they don't want to get judged. Actually, you know what? I don't care. It's a fantasy novel, right? It's a giant fantasy novel called The Stormlight Archive, and there's a particular protagonist in there that has a long life struggle, and they're fake people, they're fake character, like they don't exist, they're not real life, but that doesn't mean the wisdom involved isn't worth it. But he says the most important step a man can take is the next step. So just because you're like, hey, today I'm going to stop drinking, that doesn't mean anything. Like it's the next day that you're like, oh well, I kind of want a beer, and the day after that, oh, I'm gonna have a sip of wine. Like those aren't this. That's not the. That's you're on the same step. You haven't taken the next step of being like, I'm not gonna drink again today, and then you're taking the next step. I'm not gonna drink again today. Like you
yeah,
can't just say one thing and take one step forward because you're not going to go anywhere. It's always the next step. It's not hard to do something once. If I told you go to the gym, work out for an hour, but only today, you're gonna be like, oh, just today? Yeah, I can go do that. It's like anybody can do anything once. Not everybody can do the same
right,
thing every day for the rest of their lives. And so that's what that saying means. It's not the first step, it's the next step, and the step after
yeah,
that, and the step after that, and the step after that for eternity. Like you're not going to get
quitting or
anywhere
stopping, yeah.
going
And I think,
one
yeah,
step.
that kind of ties back into, if you can't change the past and you can't predict the future. So if you are better today than you were yesterday, you'll always be in that state of progression. And it's kind of the same concept or a similar concept, which is fantastic that you got it from a fantasy book, not even a self-help book, just a fantasy book, that the most important step is the next one. Just because you get to where you want to be doesn't mean that there's nowhere else to go. So you always got to keep moving,
Yeah,
and always got to
exactly.
want
Yeah.
to move. And that's why, like this morning, that's why I liked calling it an adventure. Because when you say, I'm on this self help thing, then you're putting this like idea that like I have to change, like there's something wrong with you or whatever, and that's not the case.
Exactly.
Life is an
Exactly.
adventure, and to say, hey man, like I got this life, I've got this amazing, gift to me to open my eyes every day and breathe. So what am I going to do with it? Well, I'm going to go do a 9 to 5 and then retire someday and then lay in a box and be buried. Like what a dull life, you know what I mean? Like every day is an adventure, and this whole process is an adventure. And as long as you look at it that way, it can actually be fun. And so,
And then every day is an adventure, but then you got to know
yeah,
that
like
like
every
not all
adventure has a
adventures are
rolled ankle.
100% fun
You know what I
100%
mean?
of the time.
Like,
Yeah, like yeah, every adventure has a rolled ankle. Every adventure has a
exactly.
splinter under your thumbnail. Like yeah, there'll be days in that adventure where you find a hot spring on a cool winter's day and you want to sit in that hot spring, but then there's going to be days where you're going to trudge up that mountain in -10-degree weather trying to get to the top. Life's a struggle, and whether that struggle is positive or negative, it's gonna be there, and you got to be ready for when those things happen, and you got to be mentally fortuitous or physically
Yeah.
fortuitous to get through those struggles. And I mean, even in BoJack Horseman on Netflix, there was when he was trying to help himself, he ran into a guy who was running, who was like, "Yeah, man, you just got to run, but you got to do it every day. You have to do it every day. That's where it's
And it's
hard.
that
He's like, you just
choice. Like you
you
have
got to
to
get up and run
choose
every
that.
day." And it's like, yeah, it's that choice. Yeah, you have to choose to do it, and it
Yeah.
doesn't have to be every day, but it has to be consistent. You can't just run a mile one
Even
day and
even
be
the
ready for your
greatest
PT
athletes in the
test next
world need
month.
rest days. You know what I mean? Like, so absolutely, I 100% agree.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
hey, man, I'm gonna have to close out here. I think it was a fantastic conversation. I'd love to continue it in a part two if you feel like there's some more to talk about.
No, that's pretty much it. Like, my life hasn't I haven't had anything so far lately. I mean, which is good, which is positive.
Yeah,
I mean,
and you always have this
like
podcast to go listen
there
to,
will be
right?
something again, but yeah, and yeah,
No,
no, but
it's all good. It is all
sorry,
good.
kind of rambled on there for a little bit. It's a little bit longer than we decided we wanted our podcast lengths to be, but you know what? These are the intro episodes of who we are. Again, I'm just a normal guy who went through normal things that may have been not as hard as others, may have been worse than others, but mental, like we're all in this together and we're all trying to just be better people. And so I hope you all continue to listen to us as a podcast. We're going to do this every week regardless. Uh, Next week, we'll probably discuss we'll get into more detail about the things we do daily and the things that we try to work on and better ourselves with. And then hopefully we get some guests. I know Casey was talking about he has some people lined up.
Yeah, absolutely. I
We're
think
willing to
those
listen to your
might even
stories if you're
be
willing to tell them.
like bonus episodes. Um, because a lot of people have reached out and said that they can relate to what we're going through and kind of the processes that we've taken or have been inspired by the process we've taken. I mean, obviously on the podcast, we haven't shared those processes quite in depth yet. But a lot of these people are people who have heard of us or are personal friends. And so once they hear about the processes, they've been inspired by that, like meditation or, positive affirmations, things that don't seem like they would work, but have science backed evidence that work. And so they try them out and they have their stories and they love to share. And so those might be like bonus, like within the week episodes, because some of those get pretty long. But yeah, I'm excited to continue this and I appreciate you coming on. Thank you, everybody, for coming in and taking the time to listen. It's been fantastic. We're proud of each and every one of you for coming in and taking that first, or now, since this is episode 2, that second step, right? Taking that next step and continuing the process of self-help. Always progression, never regression. And we'll see you guys next time.